The Minister for Energy and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, we know that the Labor Party, the party of blackouts, the party of a doubling of electricity prices the last time they were in office, have now sought to repeat the mistakes of their brethren in the Labor states of Victoria and in South Australia, and to take this energy horror show national, Mr Speaker. That is what the Labor Party want to do with their 45% emissions reduction target, which will cost the Australian economy billions of dollars in lost productivity, lost economic growth, job destruction, investment lost. That will be the legacy of that policy. Combine that with the 50% reckless renewable energy target, which they said to the Australian people that they would legislate, now seeking to walk away from that, as well as their policies to adopt right across the board emissions reduction without understanding its true consequence and impact on jobs, investment and growth, Mr Speaker. On this side of the House, we have been making positive inroads into the energy question. We have ensured that we are providing more domestic gas for users across the country. We've already seen announcements by Origin and Santos that more gas will be made available to the domestic market, Mr Speaker. We have also seen significant reforms that we've undertaken in the gas pipelines to ensure that there's more competition, more transparency and ultimately lower prices, and with transportation of gas being up to 15% of the gas bill and the electricity bill, this can be quite a significant component of reducing power prices, Mr Speaker. Then we've taken action with relation to the networks, the poles and the wire companies that make up to 50% of the household power bill. When Labor was in office, they saw a massive rise in the gold plating of the networks, but they did nothing. They stood still. They sat on their hands, Mr Speaker. It's the coalition who has said we're going to abolish the limited merits review process and put through this House legislation, which now in the Senate the Labor Party is seeking to push off to committee. They didn't do anything when they were in office to rein in the power of the network companies. Indeed, we saw a regulated rate of return when they were in office of around 10%. Now that has fallen to just above 6% today, worth hundreds of dollars to an Australian consumer, Mr Speaker. The work we've been doing with the retailers. Of course, the retail component of the bill is significant. We've seen high margins, particularly in states like Victoria. We've asked the ACCC to look into that market and to look at the operations of the particular retailers around the country. But the concessions that we're able to win from the retailers are going to be very significant in getting lower prices, Mr Speaker, because again the Labor Party did absolutely nothing. The member for Bendigo has sold out the blue-collar workers in her electorate. The member for Bendigo has nothing to say about electricity prices. The member for Bendigo does nothing to improve the household power bills. If she did, she would speak out in favour of the Turnbull government's efforts to ensure that more information, better information, more transparent information is made available to households by their energy retailers. The fact that 50% of Australian households have not changed retailers or contracts in the last 5 years, despite benefits or gains or savings being available to them more than $1,000, is quite significant, Mr Speaker. That is why we've taken action. And as the Prime Minister has indicated, a key part of the energy story as we transition from more synchronous generation to less synchronous generation, as we moved from a system where lots of people are on the grid to more people being off the grid, Mr Speaker, what we need is storage in place for wind and solar in particular. The Labor Party didn't put in place any preparations for the storage necessary, whether it's the pump hydro schemes that you see around the country or indeed around the world, which is so vital in providing storage for renewable power, or battery storage, Mr Speaker. You saw nothing from those opposite. It's only under the coalition that we have put storage at the top of the policy agenda, and we've started to see big investments underway, whether it's through the Kidston plant, the Kidston pumped hydro facility that is being looked at in Queensland, whether it's the one in Cultana in South Australia, Mr Speaker, or whether it's Snowy Hydro 2.0. You had a Premier in South Australia, Jay Weatherall, whose only energy policy is to spend $110 million on diesel generators, Mr Speaker, and to take more coal-fired power from Victoria, and then to also invest hundreds of millions of dollars in a gas-fired power generator. But then the big daddy of it all was to have a battery from a bit of Hollywood and a few donuts on sale, and therefore he thought that a battery could solve. Yes, he had donuts at the launch. He thought that some donuts, some Hollywood, some Elon Musk, and a big battery would be the answer for South Australia's energy woes. But that battery can keep South Australia going for as much as 5 minutes, Mr Speaker. For as much as 5 minutes. That is what the storage answer from the Labor Party is, whereas we are investing in Snowy Hydro 2.0, which can add up to 350,000 megawatt-hours of storage, Mr Speaker. That compares to 129 megawatt-hours that you get from Elon Musk's battery and some donuts and some Hollywood in South Australia, Mr Speaker. So the coalition, Mr Speaker, has taken steps around networks, steps around retailers, steps around storage, steps around gas, and of course we are going to see a much more stable energy system. Not to mention the 49 Finkel recommendations that we quickly accepted. The important recommendations to ensure that large generators give a minimum 3 years' notice, Mr Speaker, before they can close. Not to mention the requirement that from now on wind and solar will be required to provide their own levels of storage, which previously wasn't the case. They're just some of the recommendations that we accepted from the Finkel review, which will make a difference to the stability of the system. Now, the Prime Minister was concerned that with the predicted closure of Liddell in 2022, that there would be a supply shortfall in the market, Mr Speaker. That's why we asked the Australian Energy Market Operator, to give us a report into the level of dispatchable power we need in the system. And they indicated that were Liddell to close in 2022, there would be a 1,000 megawatt shortage of supply. Now, what did the member for Port Adelaide say? He said that this is not a problem, Mr Speaker. He even challenged the premise of the Australian Energy Market Operator's own findings, Mr Speaker. And what did the Leader of the Opposition say? The Leader of the Opposition said this is a distraction. This is the wrong priority. This is an issue for down the track, Mr Speaker. An issue for down the track, Mr Speaker. This is an issue for today. And that is why the Coalition is taking steps, reaching out to Liddell and asking them to consider reaching out to AGL and asking them to consider keeping Liddell open for an additional 5 years or selling it to another party, Mr Speaker. That is what the AGL board will consider. But the reality is that the Labor Party turned their back on the Australian Energy Market Operator and has turned their back on the recognition that when they were in office they ignored the warnings from the Energy Market Operator, from their own energy white paper, about the need to ensure sufficient gas supplies in the domestic market and not to export all their gas overseas, Mr Speaker. So we're taking actions across a number of fronts, but the Labor Party is in denial. The Labor Party is in denial because that is the party that has seen in Victoria and in South Australia a heightened risk of blackouts. Now, in this AEMO report, my colleague, the member for Chisholm, would be interested to know that the state where the highest risk of blackout coming into the end of this year, and the member for Deakin would be interested to know, Mr Speaker, would be interested to know the state that the AEMO is most concerned about is Victoria, where there is a 43% risk of load shedding or supply shortfalls. The member for Macmillan would be interested to know that in his own state, the Labor Daniel Andrews government has closed down Hazelwood, has restricted gas, has put in a renewable energy-only target, and is doing nothing to ensure the affordability and the reliability of the system. And the member for Port Adelaide should be ashamed to associate himself with that failed big experiment in South Australia from a tired, old, Labor government, nearly 16 years old, Mr Speaker. Next to 16 years old, the Labor Party is the party of higher prices and a less stable power system.